Good evening, people. Um, you ever had a dog just be incredibly rude? Craziness. So, I've always wondered why I never saw anybody do reviews of documentaries. And I think that I figured it out. Because when you're reviewing a documentary, the context of what is involved inside of the film isn't really up to interpretation, so it's hard to give your opinion about it. Like, you can say whether you enjoyed it or not, but if it's just a bunch of information, ultimately, it's hard to talk about like a theme or just without delving directly into the film. So, when we went mad, this is a 2025 documentary. It's about Mad Magazine, the beginnings, the middle, and ultimately the ending. So, if you don't know, Mad Magazine is a satire magazine that had a lot of different kinds of comic strips and various mediums that touch on politics, culture, and just modern day events. And it had run since, I don't remember exactly, I want to say the 40s or something like that, the 50s. And if you aren't interested in Mad Magazine and you aren't particularly interested in documentaries, this would be a skip for you. I'm going to give it an 8, but I would say for anyone who has never really read Mad Magazine, this is probably not going to be for you, so you could just skip it. I mean, you don't have to skip this video. My face is still handsome. So, I loved Mad Magazine when I was growing up. It is full of witticisms and criticisms of the day and of celebrities and of politicians, and there's a lot of running gags in it. So, if you pay attention long term, it pays you off. Now, like I was saying, this review is kind of just gonna be ultimately like a spoiler. Is in a way not an entire spoiler, but a spoiler in a way. Like, if you have an interest in Mad Magazine and you would rather watch this instead of me kind of give you the layout of what it is, then I would suggest that you go watch it. I think it was on Prime. I don't remember. It's called When We Went Mad, so you could look it up easily. So, Bill Gaines is not the creator of Mad, because his father actually started the company. His dad wanted to make comics for education. So, ultimately, the education comics, he was doing like STD prevention ads and stuff like that. He found that he ultimately had to stretch out to make money. So he started doing horror comics, he started doing combat comics, and he had the traditional education comics. Now, the people who wrote the different ones were getting paid per sale per issue. So as it came out, the guys who were writing the horror stuff were making a ton of money, and the guys who were writing the educational stuff were making very little money. So, to even the money, they all agreed to change it to the comics to comedic satire. And That way, everyone could put their different little stories of different things they wanted to do inside of one larger comic book that had several different angles. And ultimately, the satire started mocking McCarthyism and nuclear war threats and, basically like the erosion of democracy. And there were lots of serious things going on that were satirical in their own nature, so you could easily include them in this magazine. Now, of course, the government hated that. So, the government started accusing the comic books of being in league with communism. Now, at that time, McCarthyism was big, so it worked. And essentially, they said, we're prohibiting comics from touching on subjects like this because it's going to ruin the kids. The kids. Comics are for kids. They're aimed at kids, and we don't want kids to ultimately be influenced by commies. Hi. I'm just waking up out of that spot that you shouldn't really be in, but you're in anyway because you don't care. You just go lay wherever you want, right? I love you. So, that's Shadow. If you don't know, you may. So, where was I? Congress, I believe. Yes, they were mad, and they shut them down for poisoning the youth. Now, the answer to that for Mad was to go from being Mad Comics to Mad Magazine, because magazines were aimed towards adults. So, that's when they started Alfred E. Newman. It was issue 30. He became immediately popular, and now we're talking, they started doing all the parody stuff. And this was the parodies they did of movies that were popular at the time ultimately became the inspiration for the parodies that we know, which ultimately, the first parodies like Airplane and stuff like that. So those movies, which obviously inspired all the parody movies that we know of, right down to the newest Scary Movie. All these movies are inspired by Mad Magazine, which is kind of cool when you think about it. Not only that, but then they had all these celebrities and all these different people. It was everyone from Weird Al to fucking Howard Stern was on the thing, Jon Stewart and Patton Oswalt. There's just lots of people on there. And they were all throwing in their little tidbits about which parts of the magazine they liked the most, which parts they didn't. Now, ultimately, when it got really popular, it got taken over by shareholders, which is what always is going to happen. That's the way life is. Shareholders come in. Next thing you know, it changes from the things that people want to do to some of the things that they had to do, which is when, you're writing ads for Pepsi into the ads instead of the things that you wanted to put in there. You were putting in, whatever they wanted. Spy versus Spy had to pop up. Alfred E. Newman's face started getting really into the popular culture. Eventually, Mad TV, everything pushed and pushed and pushed, which Mad TV wasn't bad. It had some quality stuff on there. So, now, by this time, the first wave of kids who had started to read it were becoming adults. So, they were trying to appeal to those adults, but also to the new kids who were coming up. So the magazine started becoming a mix of different things, which was kind of what it was. That was around the time Bill Gaines died. I was 13 years old at that time, so by then I was pretty heavily reading it and invested into it. I read most of the older stuff, maybe not everything, you know. I had a subscription to that magazine for some period of years when I was a kid, you know what I mean, until in my 20s or whatever. And then eventually, one of my exes got me a subscription to it for a while, so I read it for some period of time in my late 20s too, maybe in my 30s. I don't really remember, but it was a quality magazine for some time. It's died out now. I don't know if it's because of the way the culture has gone. I don't know exactly what it is, but the magazine had its time. This documentary was a worthy addendum to the history of Mad Magazine, and I thought they did a really good job with it. I appreciated it as a fan. So if you were a fan of Mad Magazine and you did stick around to listen to this just to see what I said about it, like I said before, I gave it an 8. That's a pretty strong rating, and for a documentary especially. So it was interesting enough in its way. I didn't spill all the beans, you know. This was 11 minutes or 12-minute video, so in 12 minutes I didn't give you the hour and a half that they put into it. But there was a lot of lore, a lot of history, a lot of interesting stuff. And if you like Mad Magazine, give this thing a shot. If you like documentaries, give this thing a shot. If you just like a cool little buff into history, give this thing a shot. If you don't even like Mad Magazine and you had no interest in giving this a shot, but you stuck around for these teeth, they're all I got, baby. I appreciate you, and please leave a comment. Have a good night.